Shalom Aleichem and welcome to another episode of Killing the Church. I didn't have like a clever intro ready. I just realized that now. Actually, I was like,
We've broken tradition.
I didn't think of anything. Well, this is my clever intro, telling you guys and admitting to you guys that sometimes we show up to the show and we're like, wow, I have all these show notes, and I didn't prep an intro. So, shalomi all my homies. What's happening? We got the meme lord up in the chat today, Mr. Smiles. Wow, that music seems a little loud. Let me back it off a little bit here. How are you doing tonight, Mr. and Mrs. So Rabbi and Rebbitzin, how are you two doing tonight?
doing wonderful. It's been quite a week, but I have been looking forward to doing this show tonight. So,
I always look forward to the show.
Oh, a quick announcement, because I told everybody I would tell them how it went. The theology and beer thing that I went to.
Right.
It was pretty cool. It was predominantly Reformed theology based. It was a discussion on prayer. So it was a good time. Kind of discussing when to pray, why to pray, how to pray. Pretty typical Sunday school discussion.
3 times at the designated hours to coincide with the offerings. I'm kidding. Obviously, you weren't in the kind of, but yeah. So somebody already noticed in the chat, it's a little conspicuous. We have different hats today, and it's primarily because of tonight's topic. We're talking about rabbinic authority, so we're dressed more like within keeping with rabbinic authority, actually. So, and we're going to talk about a number of issues and topics today. Ranging from things like, essentially, we're going to hope to answer the question, what exactly did Yeshua expect from his disciples concerning the authorities, like the rabbinate, or at least the scribes and the Pharisees that would become the rabbinate, and what did Paul expect of the early ecclesia when it came to the rabbinic authority, yeah, so we got a lot of material, but it should be fun. It sounds like a boring topic, like law, but it should be fun. Honestly, I'm looking forward.
It'll be a good time.
I always look forward to doing these episodes. So before we get started and we share each other's spirits for today, which I'm actually going for a not spirit, but I'm still hard drinks for hard theology, right?
Yes.
But before we get started, do not forget, please, to bless the like button and the Nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, the subscribe button. Not changing that. I love that too much.
Yep.
And if you are drinking tonight with us, comment what you're drinking below. If you got any recommendations, definitely throw them our way and we'll give them a shot. This is a very interactive live show, so if you got questions, throw them in the chat. And then we'll get to it if it's if it's good or if it stands out, or if we try to get to as many questions as we can, but just depending. Yeah, I think that's all of the formalities and algorithmic stuff out of the way, right?
Did we do a shout out? I think we forgot the shout out.
Shout out to who?
To our patrons.
Oh, yes. Actually, hold on. Yeah, I need to do a thing here, because I gotta get rid of this in order to pull this up, which temporarily stops the music, unfortunately. Yeah, so this is once again, this video is brought to you by our top tier heretics, and really all of our heretics. Every single dollar really helps, really means a lot. There's a lot of big things coming because of your guys' support, and one of those things, we announced it last week, but not vocally. And Brad, if you want to tell them what it is we're doing.
Well, we are launching our website. It's gonna be a big thing. We're working on merch items and articles and stuff. So and a few really neat courses that are going to be, more practical knowledge on practical observance. And so, yeah, it's going to be an awesome time. The merch items actually I've been the most excited about.
we got some really fun stuff in there. And also, by the way, if you guys have ideas of things that you would like to see on the merch store, things that you would want to have, drop it in the chat. We will probably turn it into something. I mean, why not? So definitely crowdsource, whatever you guys want to see here or whatever. We are here to try and serve you guys as much as possible. And even if that means making a mug that has some stupid thing you heard us say once on it, I mean, whatever, we'll put it up there. Coming from the literal web developer.
Oh, man.
But
yeah, I already have a hoodie designed. William Turner.
We got some hoodies. We got, beer glasses. We have a couple of stuff.
Oh, this is an idea we intended to pass by some people. And you guys can turn in your votes on our Discord server. Let us know what you think in the, I guess in the Patreon section or the main chat. Biblically based dark humor.
Yes.
We've considered putting some biblically based dark humor on some items.
They're all saying no mugs in the chat.
No mugs, really?
Yeah, we've got 2 no mugs.
Interesting. So, wow, that's really interesting. So so there's a couple of mugs, but you don't have to buy them. That's fine.
Right.
I got a mug because the mug that I designed, I want. So,
yeah, I think after they see the mug, they'll want it. Just saying.
Maybe. We'll see. Everyone has a mug. It's sort of like a obligatory merch swag.
That's one I hadn't thought of. Everybody's saying stickers. I hadn't even
stickers.
considered stickers.
Yep.
But stickers is an option, and stickers will be easy.
Honestly, that's been the first thing on my mind.
The Patreon actually automatically sends stickers to certain tiers too, so we do have some stickers. But
there we go. We got one for mugs.
A beta girl.
Look at that.
They do.
All right.
The cabinet.
That one vote counts for 50. So if you guys want no mugs, I need 50 no's.
Patches and pins. Yep. Okay. So all these options. Some of these I've already started on, and some of them are very easy to make. So I'll spend a day doing that.
But the website drops August 1st. Once again, we got plenty of articles on there. We are going to kind of, I guess, start moving away from the Patreon and drop everything through the website so that everything is kind of neat and organized in certain areas. With classes, we'll be teaching courses on some basic like how-to. A question we get all the time is like, okay, where do I start? We're going to have classes for that. Literally, you can take like an actual course. The articles, videos, exclusive content, all of that stuff is going on the website. That drops on the 1st of August, which is coincidentally the first day of the new Torah portion, Devarim. We start a whole new book beginning with that day. And so I'm excited. That's what we've got going on. Let me get rid of this and bring back that.
Hey, now it looks like home.
Yeah, there we go. Oh, and let me get rid of that sliding banner. That's getting old real quick. Boom. Okay. So tonight's topic. First,
right.
What are you drinking tonight?
I am wrapping up on the IW Harper. I'll start getting much smaller bottles. That way I can cycle something out every week and be cool. But for now, I'm finishing off the IW Harper.
I shouldn't have asked you. I regret asking.
Yep.
I am rocking our Boys of the Church split. Just having some summer ale, since the summer ale is really good, in my opinion.
Oh, so I'm having what's called a Boilermaker. For those of you who don't know, which is like a shot of whiskey and a beer. It's one of the, believe it or not, one of the oldest mixed drinks that there is, except that it's not technically mixed, because you drink them separately, but it's called a Boilermaker. And so, yeah, the beer that I am enjoying tonight, this will be different, is called Guayabera by Cigar City, and it is a Citra Pale Ale. So it's like a tropical citrusy pale ale.
I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. Sounds good.
It's one of my dad's favorites, actually.
Summer, yeah, well, y'all are Cuban, so of course you like try to pick the most Spanish sounding possible thing out there, and you're like, that's a new favorite thing now. I'm guilty of the same thing. I look at the beer section, I'm like, all right, what is the most Irish? And then I'm like, oh, this is the best because it's the most Irish. All right, so tonight's topic: rabbinic authority or Talmudic authority, or however you want to. And we actually have to say Talmudic authority, really, because there are people in the Talmud who aren't rabbis.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like authoritative people who were never called rabbi. A great example of this is actually Hillel and Shammai. Both are never called rabbi. Not one.
Yo, William Turner, I'm using that though. I'm not gonna post it, but I'm using that.
I flashed it up there for a second. I didn't. Yeah. And for like the biblical dark humor stuff, do you want to give them that example? The baby example.
So yeah, hold on? What's the citation? 1 Kings.
9 something, I think.
I think it's 3 something.
Hang on. It's you know what
you're talking about.
You're right. It's the exact citation where King Solomon suggests that the two women fighting over one child divided in half, and it'll say like the halfling or like halvesies.
Yeah, a baby onesie that says halvesies, like.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
And that citation.
Yeah, definitely doing that. Onesies. All right, so back to the topic.
Right, Talmudic authority. And this is a heated topic just between Judaism and Christianity alone, right? Between those two religions, this is a heated subject of debate. But this is especially heated in the Torah observant movement that has sprung out of Christianity. All right, those who follow Yeshua and also do their best to observe as much as they can understand of the Torah. And so this is kind of a big dividing point, especially with the Hebrew Roots movement, especially. This is kind of one of the things that defines the Hebrew Roots movement.
And even a lot of Messianic movements.
Is their disdain for Talmudic authority.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that because there is a certain precedence that is laid out in the New Testament.
So first of all, real quick, I think we've done this 100 times, but we'll just clear the air once again, real quick. For anyone just joining us or not familiar, a lot of people are under the impression that the Talmud is nothing but a bunch of man-made traditions, or that the Talmud is the oral law. And in a sense, that's kind of true, that it's the oral law. It contains the oral law, but it is not itself. The Talmud is not itself an oral law, or the oral Torah. It is a collection of essentially conversations from the courtroom. I've said this time and time again. To say the phrase "the Talmud teaches" is a bit like saying "the library teaches," which
Right.
It does not. A library doesn't teach anything. A library is a collection of books with many different teachings in them. The Talmud is exactly the same. There's hundreds of different conversations all happening, debates, challenges to certain rules that are being in the making. And then sometimes there's no final conclusion. Sometimes it's just two rabbis have their two opinions and they disagree and they go their separate way, kind of thing. But the Mishnah, it would be more proper to say that the Mishnah is the oral Torah, and the Talmud is sort of the debates surrounding the Mishnah and Scripture.
Right.
So, yes.
Yeah. The Talmud is more so the case law part of it. That's where you get the dispute between rabbis in many cases not even rabbis, right? We just mentioned that not everybody in the Talmud is a rabbi, but yeah, that's where the dispute between opinions and interpretations will take place. That's where you're going to read it. Is anytime that somebody pulls one cherry-picked, I guess you could say, verse out of the Talmud and says, well, the Talmud says this, as though that's like a hard, fast teaching from the Talmud. Oftentimes, if you just read one verse beyond that one, you'll find where it's like immediately contradicted by another teacher.
Yeah. In fact, every night on Shabbat, if you go to a Shabbat prayer service, there's a portion just after you welcome in the Sabbath, after Kabbalat Shabbat. You actually read a tractate of the Mishnah, like a chapter from Tractate Shabbat from the Mishnah. And in straight up in one of the paragraphs, it's like a really weird ruling, but it's like one rabbi says you can't fill an eggshell with oil and hang it in such a way that it slowly drips oil into a lamp. Like you can't do that. Basically, a perpetual, like it refills automatically. And so it's like this rabbi says you can't do it, and then literally in that same verse it says, "But Rabbi Yehuda permits this." And so it's like right there in the one sentence. It's not even separated by a number or a verse or nothing. It's like, you can't do this, says this rabbi, but this rabbi said that's fine. Like, right. So it's very much like some things are just opinions, and it depends on what side of the aisle you're going to fall on, and whose teachings you follow, and that will determine how you practice, more or less. Mm-hmm. So that out. Oh, and the last thing. So, a lot of they say that like some of these are traditions of man, right? Now, traditionally, it's accepted that the Mishnah was also handed down at Mount Sinai.
We'll be reading some of that.
Yeah, we will be. Now, some things exist in the oral tradition that may not have been handed down from Sinai. And a lot of people like to point this out to say, well, a lot of it's just made up, man-made. It came much later. And now often hear phrases like, and the Jews refuse to accept this kind of thing. No. And right before we read Pirkei Avot, there's actually a little story in this Menachot 29b. This is from the Babylonian Talmud. Here's a summary of the story. Moses is, receiving the Torah, and he asks God, why do you decorate the Torah with the little crowns on the top? And God's like, well, one day, a rabbi's going to extrapolate something from this. And he's like, what? I want to see. And so Moses travels back in time, and he sits in Rabbi Akiva, who lives during just after Jesus' time. Second Jewish Revolt. He's actually part of that. But so he's sitting in Rabbi Akiva's academy, and he's in the back seat. So he's like all the way in the back. And he's listening to Rabbi Akiva teach, and he's like, okay, not following. And eventually his students like challenge him, and they're like, well, where did you hear this? And Rabbi Akiva says, I heard it from Moses. This was handed down by Moses as a halacha from Mount Sinai. And Moses is in the back like, I didn't say any of that. So he like travels back into the future, or back into the past, and he was like, that, he was actually amazed by it. He was like the teaching actually comforted him, but they understand that there is actually like the halachic authority is a living, breathing thing. They understand this. They know that some of these things are a minhag, which is the word for tradition. They understand this. So you can't just say they've blindly accepted this thing and they treat it as above the word of God. They do not. And they're very much aware of the internal struggle that exists between the halachic traditions and the scriptures themselves. So, anyway, let's jump to Pirkei Avos.
Yeah, I was going to say, and right before we get into that, actually, a few things before we get into Pirkei Avos is this. I find it interesting that in this example, Moshe travels to the future to Rabbi Akiva, where what we're about to read about in Pirkei Avot ends. It's the actual end of the line. of actual smicha. So the example that Moshe was shown was the last absolute line of succession of his own smicha.
Interesting. Go on.
That's right. But so yeah, before we get into Pirkei Avot, there's one thing that I want to read first as an introduction,
Do it.
and this is going to be Matthew 23,
Of course.
starting in verse 1.
Do it.
Right. And this is the HCSB. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples. The scribes and the Pharisees are seated in the chair of Moses. Therefore, do whatever they tell you and observe it, but don't do what they do because they don't practice what they teach. Now, I have heard it argued before that it...
You almost dropped the
That it-
camera.
yeah. That it says that they seated themselves in the seat of Moses. In other words, they grabbed a position of power that was not theirs to grab, and that's what he's saying. That is not even a possible translation.
Not
Of
only is that not possible, but it defeats the next line. Therefore,
Right.
whatever they say, do. If Yeshua had a problem with them usurping that seat, then he would have said something. But
right.
the following verse automatically makes that not the case.
And one other thing to point out, and we'll get into this in a minute, actually, is the whatever they say, that do and obey. So there's another argument that I gather you have quite a bit of information to unravel on this. There's the argument that, well, yeah, it was the seat of Moses, right? Which was an actual seat in a synagogue back in the first century where they could only read the written Torah. Well, if that were the case, then Yeshua wouldn't have said whatever they say, that do and obey. It would be whatever he says, that do and obey. Right?
We're gonna get into. I'm gonna name drop. We're gonna get into Nehemiah Gordon's thing in a minute.
Right.
We'll do that after Pirkei Avos. But
So
we're gonna
the-
talk about that.
the seat of Moses, right? We'll address that objection, but very quickly to explain what the seat of Moses is. The seat of Moses is exactly that. It's the position of authority. It's not an actual seat, right? It is the seat of authority that you sit in. That's why it's called the seat of Moses, right? It's the role that he was positioned in. It's the authority that he held. And this is where Pirkei Avot picks up. We're going to start in Pirkei Avot 1:1. Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. Seamus, tell us who the men of the great assembly are.
That would be the Sanhedrin.
Right, but particularly what time period is he talking about?
For the men of the Great Assembly?
Yeah,
That's immediately after the judges period.
right.
Well, during and after.
So what follows here is directly from the men of the great assembly, right? They're directly from the Sanhedrin. They said three things: be patient in administration of justice, raise many disciples, and make a fence around the Torah. Shimon the righteous was one of the last of the men of the great assembly. He used to say, the world stands upon three things: the Torah, the temple service, and the practice of acts of piety.
Charity.
Yep.
Some translations say charity. That's why I say that.
Antigonus, a man of Socho, received the oral tradition from Shimon the righteous. He used to say, do not be like the servants who serve the master in the expectation of receiving a reward, but be like the servants who serve the master without the expectation of receiving a reward, and let the fear of heaven be upon you. Yosei ben Yozer, a man of Zereda, and Yosei ben Yochanan, a man of Jerusalem, received the oral tradition from them, i.e., Shimon the righteous and Antigonus. And it says, Ben Yozer used to say, let thy house be a house of meeting for the sages, and sit in the very dust of their feet, and drink in their words with thirst. And then Ben Yochanan used to say, let thy house be wide open, let the poor be members of thy household, engage not in too much conversation with women. They said this with regard to one's own wife. How much more does the rule apply with regard to another man's wife?
Yeah, it's mostly about not, spending too much time alone with somebody else's woman.
Right.
Yeah.
And Joshua ben Parachia and Natai the Arbalite received the oral tradition from them. And later it says, Judah ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach received the oral tradition from them. It goes on to say, Shemaiah and Abtalion, that's Shemaiah, not Shammai.
not the Shammai.
Shemaiah and Abtalion received the oral tradition from them, and it's got a few sayings from them. Mm-hmm. Then we get all the way to Hillel and Shammai received the oral tradition from them. Hillel used to say, be of the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace, loving mankind and drawing them close to the Torah. So that we know that most of you know who Shammai and Hillel were, right? So we picked this exact bunch to read. Okay, so we have a direct line from at least Moses to Hillel and Shammai, right? That is recorded. Now that line actually goes on beyond the lifetime of Jesus. What the particular teacher that Seamus just mentioned, Rabbi Akiva. Right, he's a 2nd century rabbi. He would have actually been a contemporary of the apostles, because he's very early 2nd century rabbi, and his students were the last ones to receive the oral tradition and smicha within that dates back directly to Moses, and they all died. So we know exactly when the line of smicha was broken. Mm-hmm. So we do know the writings and teachings and teachers that did have actual ordination that dates back all the way to Moses, right? It did live beyond the lifetime of Jesus, and that's what we're here to discuss.
Right. So when we go back to Matthew 23, in fact, let me pull this up. So the seed of Moses, because you just read from Pirkei Avos. Sound like an Ashki. Pirkei Avot. And it's not my fault, guys, okay? So the reason it's called the seed of Moses, all right, so Nehemiah Gordon has this whole thing where he talks about the seat of Moses as a particular chair, literal seat in a synagogue that was, I think the synagogue is from Chorazin. And this is simply not true. It's completely fabricated. This is not to say that, the head rabbi at whatever synagogue sits in a literal seat of Moses and he reads from the Torah scroll. And so you only have to do whatever the Torah scroll says and not anything else. That's Rabbi Nehemiah Gordon's assertion there. And he bases this off of the Shem Tov Matthew. And he is being very intellectually dishonest with the Shem Tov rendering. There are 9 existing copies of the Shem Tov Hebrew Matthew, and 6 of them read the way all of our Greek manuscripts read, which is they seat in the seat of Moses. Therefore, whatever they say, that is the Pharisees and the scribes do. Right. And in his version, he reads from one of the few documents that have a different rendering, and it says, therefore, whatever he says, that's Moses. We have no Greek manuscript that attests to that. And only the Shem Tov Matthew, and even not all of them, only a couple of them read that way. And then the last bit of information that he's not being totally honest with you about when he's talking about this is that the Shem Tov Matthew was specifically written to be an anti-missionary Matthew. So it's very specifically like trying to disprove Yeshua as a messianic figure at all. So with those biases in mind, Obviously, there's some issues with just from treating that as an authoritative text anyway. But all that to say, Nehemiah makes this entire presentation, and he's being very, very intellectually dishonest about the whole thing. Anyway, the seat of Moses is an idiom. It means the Sanhedrin, and it comes from Exodus 18, where every time it says Moses would sit to judge the people. And this was common. Pharisees, even in Yeshua's day, would do this. They would sit down before teaching. Nowadays, we're used to like seeing the pastor get up and stand right behind a podium, and then lesson time. Well, back then they would sit down. Like when the rabbi would sit down, lesson time. Like they would teach from the seated position. But anyway, yes, a seat also means like judgment, like a judgment seat, a position of authority. And actually, here's what's cool. We have both Jewish and Christian literature that attest that the phrase "the seat of Moses" applies to the men of the Great Assembly, which is the Sanhedrin, before it was called the Sanhedrin, because the Sanhedrin is a Greek word, so it gets called that later during the Hasmonean period. But it always existed. It just had different names. But there's actually an epistle from Peter to James. In fact, let me pull it out here. There's an epistle from Peter to James from the first chapter. It's only one chapter. It's very short. And it says, Moses delivered the tradition to the 70 elders who succeeded his seat. And so Moses' seat is the Sanhedrin. So it's very, very clear reference. Anyway. So what is Yeshua saying here? What does Jesus say? The scribes and Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses. That means they have that position of authority that was granted to them. They belong there. Therefore, whatever they say, do. Just don't do what they do by creating all these heavy extra laws and loads that they themselves are not willing to do. And that's just the hypocrisy aspect of it. But he definitely endorses the fact that they have the authority to make halachic rulings. And so you should submit yourself to that authority. And Brad, you look like you're concentrating on something, man. What's up?
Yeah, I'm reading a particular question in the comments about and you'll be familiar with this one because it's a very popular one that gets brought up in the anti-Talmud sects in Sanhedrin 54b.
There's a lot of stuff in Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
In like the 50s too, like between 53 and 59, there's a lot going on there. But it looks like we can address that a little later. Yeah. I mean, we're about 30 minutes in and we still got a little bit more to cover. So we'll try to wrap this up in a neat little bow and then get to some questions. Okay, so that's what Yeshua says about rabbinic authority. Another thing we've said time and time again, excuse me, that Yeshua very much, there are times in which he does challenge a particular tradition. And a lot of times he actually doesn't say that the tradition is bad. He just puts it in its right place. Sometimes like the hand washing thing, he never says, okay, stop washing your hands. He's just saying, well, hold on, your priorities are in the other direction here. But at no point does he say the hand washing ritual is a bad thing and you should stop doing it. And so,
right, I think that gets misunderstood a lot too. The general understanding that people derive from that is the view that you'll be familiar with is like, well, okay, that's so the traditions are not bad, they're just not a priority. So you can do them if you want, but it's not obligatory. And it's like, well, that's not even the point of what Yeshua is pointing out. He in no way makes a case that it's not obligatory or that it's not priority. The case that he's making to those particular Pharisees is that it is not top priority.
Yeah.
Right? He's not arguing that it's not a priority at all. He's just arguing that it's not the utmost prioritized.
I think it's later in the same chapter where he says, woe unto you. It's the 7 woes, right? Tithing the dill, the mint, and the cumin. these you ought to have done and not left
the others undone.
Yeah. So and you'll see that when you read through the rest of Matthew 23 and you read it in its context as one from one rabbi to another. He's not saying to throw these traditions away because they're traditions. He's saying that, listen, like, do these, continue to do them. They're fine. But once they start getting in the way of things, or you've created a backwards priority because of them, you need to set that aside. And what's interesting is I usually sit in a Daf Yomi with the rabbi here, and there are often times where we're reading from the Talmud, and he will stop to say, in cases like this, we take the lenient approach because this is a rabbinic mandate, and since it's a rabbinic mandate and not a Mishnaic mandate, we can waive the rabbinic mandate and be more lenient in cases like this. And basically, he's like, it's an idea of priority. He's like, listen, we understand that this is a halakhic ruling from the rabbinate, and so its authority is a little less than the authority that it derives from. And so, yeah, again, the Jewish people are very much aware of the nuance of the whole thing. They're not just making it up as they go, and they're certainly not just denying that some of this is comes later. They know this. And one thing to clear up real quick too: the scribes and Pharisees. The scribes and the Pharisees are buddies. They hung out together. They were basically the same sect, more or less. The Pharisees really liked the scribes because they could always rely on them to have a lot of scripture memorized, which is really helpful to them. And but they would become the rabbinate. And that's where I brought up that before, like Hillel and Shammai weren't called rabbis. That doesn't mean they weren't. They just were never called rabbis. But that sect, the Pharisee sect, becomes the rabbinate. And as Smicha gets lost, that they stick with the whole rabbinate thing, because rabbi just meant teacher, right? So
right, yeah. The current rabbinic Judaism is a modern outgrowth from what the Pharisees were, more or less, and which is interesting, right? Because it's as much as Yeshua disputed with some of the Pharisees on occasion when he had occasion to, he chastised the Sadducees even harsher, and then also dismissed them. And the modern representative that we have as an outgrowth from what could have been considered the Sadducee movement is Karaite Judaism, which is ironic because Karaite Judaism is the one that everybody who hates Talmudic authority runs to figure out how to argue against it.
Excuse me. The Karaites are modern day Sadducees, by the way.
Yeah,
Not
sort
sure
of. The I think the Karaites actually do accept the prophets, which is a difference.
I think so, but they outright reject any oral traditions in any way,
even though they utilize them.
I mean, you have to. You can't have any. I'm gonna do a rant, but I don't have the thing ready. I don't have my rant thing. You cannot have a Bible translation, period, without the oral traditions, or at least in the Torah. The nikudot, the little dots and dashes, symbols that help you to determine what word you're supposed to say for this particular jumble of letters, is entirely dependent on everything written in Talmud and Mishnaic literature. You need the oral traditions to even create a coherent translation. So if you have an English translation of a Bible in I see what you're doing. What'd you do? Why'd you change that?
I did not mean to change that.
Why would you do that? But if you have an English translation in your hands, you have the oral tradition to thank for that.
Yep.
Whether you want to admit it or not, and whether you want to recognize that or not. You don't have to like it. Facts don't care about your feelings. I'm going to take a line from Ben, my favorite angry Jew. Okay, so that's Yeshua's standpoint. Now, another thing that we've said is that, if Yeshua were walking around today, he would very likely look like an Orthodox rabbinic Jew. because he very much did keep within what was expected of him as a rabbi of his time, with very little exception, and the exceptions are the only ones that we hear about, and they're recorded in the Gospels. So, and this again is one of those things where any rabbi out there, you're going to find exceptions, and that's because there's all sorts of opinions and details and stuff that exist within the Mishnah of the Talmud in and of themselves. So, okay. But yeah, the scribes and the Pharisees, they become the rabbinate. So when we use them interchangeably because they are the same. They just, that name sort of, just like the sect of the way becomes Christianity. They're technically the same thing. They just kind of shift names as the time moves forward.
Yep.
All right. So now the meat and potatoes of tonight's episode. What did Paul say about rabbinic authority?
Oh boy. Well, this is going to burn a lot of people, right? And we hear this from both the left wing and the right wing every election cycle, right? No matter who comes out on top, you get Christians from both sides of the political spectrum that will cite this passage, and that is going to be the words of Paul in Romans 13, where he expresses that you should submit to the authorities which are over you, right? And he speaks a bit about how God has appointed these authorities, right? And this is always applied to government. The problem is, Paul's not talking about the state government.
No. In fact, so I have Tim Hegg's Romans commentary up here, and he's actually pulling a lot of stuff from Mark D. Nanos's commentary and a few other sources as well. But yeah, one thing that you can easily point out, you open up any Bible, many of them will have the Christian obligation to the state as the heading for chapter 13 in Romans. Now, there's a couple of things going on here that's wrong with that. In its context, it makes zero sense, and it's primarily because the whole time from chapter 12 and then through the end of chapter 13, he's talking about the relationship that exists between fellow believers and fellow brothers who might not be believers, like fellow Jews who have not yet come to Yeshua. And he's talking about this relationship that exists in the synagogue. And then if we accept the Christian interpretation, for a brief moment, he says, oh, and by the way, subject yourself to the Roman government. And then he goes immediately right back to talking about the civil relationship within the synagogue. It's very weird, very abrupt, doesn't make sense, but that's the way Christians have been reading this text for a long time. And so this is from Mark D. Nanos's Mystery of Romans. And beginning quote, "It is my contention that Paul's instruction in Romans 13, 1-7 are not concerned with the state, empire, or any other such organization of secular government. His concern was rather to address the obligations of Christians, particularly Christian Gentiles, associating in the synagogues of Rome for the practice of their new faith, to subordinate themselves to the leaders of the synagogue and to the customary rules of behavior that have been developed in the diaspora synagogues for defining the appropriate behavior of righteous Gentiles seeking to associate with Jews and their God and their Messiah." End quote. I mean, that's good stuff. And we're going to talk, because if we go and we just read, right, Romans 13, do you have that open in the Bible? Do you have that ready to go?
Ooh, I do not. I
just don't feel like opening because I got like 3 books open.
I can. Already. Give me uno momento.
As you do, I'm going to read the next bit of quote here. Because what we're going to do is we're going to read Romans 13. And there are bits and pieces that we have to address that are going to raise some questions. So, excuse me. After reminding us, this is again from Tim Hegg's commentary. that the believing Gentiles were to view their unbelieving Jewish neighbors as brothers and not as the enemy, Mark Nanos goes on to write concerning the leaders of the synagogue to whom the believing Gentiles were to submit themselves. Quote, however, their leaders are to be obeyed, for their authority is from God, and is recognized even by the Roman Empire for the execution of their responsibility to oversee the behavior of the Jewish communities to which Christian Gentiles are now attached through synagogue attendance, and when meeting in their homes under the authority granted to the synagogues. It's recognized by Roman authority, the synagogues are, so that's actually another part of this whole thing. And that's end quote there. So all right, so you got it. You want just read verses 1 and stop at verse 7.
Okay. Everyone must submit to governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist are instituted by God. So then, the one who resists the authority is opposing God's command, and those who oppose it will bring judgment on themselves, for rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have its approval. For government, for government is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, because it does not carry the sword for no reason. For government is God's servant, an avenger, that brings wrath on the one who does wrong. Therefore, you must submit, not only because of the wrath, but also because of your conscience. And for this reason, you pay taxes, since the authorities are God's public servants, continually attending to these tasks. Pay your obligation to everyone, taxes to those who you owe taxes, tolls to those you owe tolls, respect to those you owe respect, and honor to those you owe honor.
So that taxes bit is the bit that we're going to get into, because that's the part where most people think, okay, we have to be talking about the Roman state.
Right.
Not true. If you were in the Jewish community, you were exempt from the Roman state taxes because of their association with paganry. And Rome respected the Jewish anti-pagan practices, and so they exempted them from the...
The Fiscus Judaicus did not come about until after 70 AD. Right.
And that's because of the rebellion and everything. So Rome is a little butthurt after that. But Paul did talk about their authority coming from God. And so I want to look at Deuteronomy 17, starting at verse 10. You are to act according to the sentence they tell you from that place that Hashem chooses, and take care to do all that they instruct you. This is the they here is the Sanhedrin. And the place that Hashem chooses would be the Temple Mount, where the Sanhedrin would meet, in the halls of hewn stone. You are to act according to the instruction they teach you, and to the judgment they tell you. You must not turn aside from the sentence they tell you, to the right or to the left. The man who acts presumptuously by not listening to them, who stands to serve before Hashem your God, or to the judge, that man shall die. You are to purge the evil from Israel. So it's actually a death sentence to go against now, strictly speaking, it's a death sentence. I don't very, very few people, if any, I'm not aware of any that I've read about that have been sentenced to death for simply not listening to the Sanhedrin. A lot of sometimes the rabbinate will interpret a death to be a cut off. Like, all right, if you're just going to be a non-law abiding citizen, dope. You're not in the community anymore, and that counts as a death. So it just depends. There's a lot of nuance to all that whole thing, but I got a couple of things here. So if the proposed interpretation is allowed to stand, then the submission to the synagogue officials, even those who had not yet confessed Yeshua as the Messiah, is proper conduct for the sect of the way, according to Paul. The halachic rulings of the early synagogue was considered by the apostles and by Paul as essential and essentially normative, rather than superfluous or even contrary to the faith with Yeshua. This was supposed to be in sync we're talking about a time before Christianity was a separate religion materially. It wasn't yet. It was still a sect within Judaism, and Paul lived and died having never imagined that there would be a future where the sect that he helped to foster would become its own completely separate and distinct religion. He never would have envisioned that.
Matter of fact, so 2 things here. And one of them, I guess we can put off until the end when we start to answer questions. Because it's interesting that this subject actually has come up this week. And you and I were even tagged in a video about this that Inspiring Philosophy did. And I still plan on making a TikTok response because there was a lot that was not necessarily incorrect, but mispremised and half-truth. But any time that anybody asks you to give a citation, I know there's a few others on TikTok that we engage that are constantly asking for a citation where new Gentile believers are being instructed to carry on and continue in Torah. This is it.
This is it.
This is it right here. They are being instructed to be in compliance with the Sanhedrin.
Not only did Yeshua explicitly state that, Paul is explicitly stating that. And again, Paul, I mean, there's not 2 separate religions. They're meeting in one synagogue. And so, in fact, one more bit here. Paul is teaching here that the established authorities within the Jewish community are to be received as appointed by God and therefore worthy of respect and of an attitude of submission. And he's got one more thing here that I really, really liked that he said, basically, and I very much agree with this, because in your and my experience, between the experience between the 2 of us, this is exactly what should be happening, what's described here. The overarching message of the apostle, that is Paul, is that those who in the name of Yeshua, those who the name of Yeshua, I think that's a typo. Those who are in the name of the Yeshua should be characterized as submissive to authority, not rebellious in spirit. Yeshua said it once. Your righteousness should exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees. So that should be your testimony, your willingness to be a part of the community and be even more strict in your observance than they already are, is the kind of, that should be your testimony for him as his representative here to show how far you're willing to go in the name of love and unity, and be part of the community. You're not going to win over somebody by being a rebellious and breaking away. Again, there's a time and a place for this kind of thing. Yeshua challenged every once in a while in the appropriate context. We're not saying you can't question authority. Absolutely, it's encouraged to do so in Judaism. But there are some things that you're not going to agree with that you are being encouraged here to accept anyway. And sometimes, you just have to bite the bullet sometimes. And until Mashiach comes and clears everything up, there's a lot of self-discipline and self-sacrifice you have to make for the sake of the community.
Yep.
So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No. I mean, if we're gonna get right over into answering some questions after that.
Oh, the taxes. That's right.
Oh, right.
Last thing. This is historic. Okay, so the Romans exempted Jews from their taxes. Okay, so what could Paul possibly be talking about here with the taxes here? There was a tax that was imposed on the Jewish people that was in dispute as to whether or not the Jews should be paying this tax. That's the temple tax. The Jews in the diaspora thought of essentially were disputing on whether or not that this was a legitimate tax that they should be paying, because they live nowhere near the temple. They don't benefit from the service of the temple in any way, shape, or form. They don't utilize its needs at all, being that far away in Rome. And the temple tax is to help so that the Levites can attend to your service on your behalf and perform things like, the Passover offering.
It's because the temple tax is also, if I'm not mistaken, in Torah, that's one of those that's part of the, in the land.
Yes. And so there was like a halakhic question as to whether or not anyone outside the land should even bother paying the tax. And Paul talks about here this tax. This has to be the temple tax. It's the thing that makes the most contextual sense historically. And again, this is a letter to a community, so there's a lot of presuppositions built into this letter. And so there are two authorities here. Actually, it's Jacob Neusner, Tim Hegg, of course, Mark Nanos, of course, are of the opinion that this is the temple tax, and he's encouraging them to pay the temple tax. And then he tells them towards the end of the letter, I believe, I'm going to come and I'm going to collect the temple tax and I'm going to take it back to Jerusalem. Like he very explicitly states it later on. So that's the tax. And again, that's going to be the hang up for a lot of people reading this for the first time. Then that might make them think, okay, this is obviously talking about the state, like the Roman state. Not so. It's completely different. It's a temple tax. So it's to the Jewish state, really, which again should show that as members of the community, right, as Gentiles coming into the community and worshiping their God and believing in their Messiah, that you should support them in their state and you should be submitted to them as the younger brother and seek their guidance, because they have the staff until to whom it belongs comes back, in our case, as the ruling king. They have that authority. That authority was granted to them by God. It was given to them in Deuteronomy 17. It's given to them again, Paul reiterates here in Romans 13. End of rant.
So on this note, though, this is a good question. Is this why the Catholic Church changed the Sabbath to Sunday? Because they have the authority. So this is one where this is right there along the lines of the discussion going on with Mike from Inspiring Philosophy, right? And the answer that he would give you would be true in part, but also a bit of a half truth here. The Catholic Church did not change the Sabbath to Sunday, at least not in terms as scholars understand it, right? I understand that when you say Catholic Church, right, you are including the patristic fathers, because anybody who does church history honestly understands that what Catholicism came out of was what the patristic fathers built. All right, it's really only Protestants that make a hard distinction between the patristic fathers and the Catholic Church. They need for that distinction to exist in order for Protestantism to be validated, right? Because if the people that they esteem as having been disciples of the disciples, right? Granted, this is alleged, but it is alleged that Ignatius and Polycarp, right, were disciples of the disciples.
And it's possible. I mean, disciples disagreeing and arguing with people that raised them up is not unheard of, especially in the Gentile world.
Sure. Especially, if they were disciples of John, who was by far the youngest of the disciples. Sure, it's possible, but there is no hard evidence of this. It's a claim that's made by only I don't even think a handful of people. I think it's really only made by one person.
It was basically the lineage was never really recorded until much later, where I think like Origen basically says he's passing down a tradition he received. So and he's like, this is what I was told, and so he writes it down.
So in other words, Christianity, I'm addressing you right now. If you disagree with the idea that Rabbi Akiva had an ordination that dates all the way back to Moses based on the tradition that the Jews have laid out, you have absolutely no grounds to make any claim that Polycarp or Ignatius were disciples of the disciples, right? It is easier to build a case that Judaism had that line of succession than it is to build a case that Christianity had that. Anyway, right, I understand when you say the Catholic Church, you are including the patristic fathers. On a scholarly level, this will be contested. And it will also be contested that even the patristic fathers changed the Sabbath to Sunday. I don't put much stock in the contestation of that, because what we see the precedents for in the New Testament, even clearly in this passage, right, where Gentiles are being commanded to fall in line with the Sanhedrin, which would have made them Sabbath observant, That for only I mean, Ignatius is what, technically only like what, 60 years later, more or less, 60,
something
70
like that.
years later. Yeah. So for in 70 years there to have been an already clear-cut precedence of observing Sunday, that's just highly illogical and improbable. So more than likely, the patristic fathers are the ones who set a new precedence. And in fact, the way that their writings spell out, when Ignatius, in his letter to the Ephesians, right, or not, the Magnesians, writes out the observance of the Lord's Day in opposition to the Sabbath, his writing is not as though he is defending an already set precedence. His writing is as though he's actually trying to set a new precedence by leading away from what was already the set precedence. So likely the shift from Sabbath to Sunday worship began in the time of Ignatius himself.
Post Second Temple destruction, which is where a lot of the splits start happening, by the way. But before that, it was very much, it was not a monolith, but it was very much still within Judaism. All right, so last thing I want to read, and then we'll take a couple of questions. So get your questions ready in the chat now. If you guys got questions, now's your chance. Go ahead and ask away, and I'm going to read one last quote on a translation here for verse 7. Again, coming from Tim Heck's commentary here. He translates this as render to all. This is verse 7 from chapter 13 in Romans. Render to all what is due to them. Tax to whom tax is due. Custom to whom custom is due. Fear to whom fear. And honor to whom honor. Okay. The tax no doubt refers to the temple tax, as I have noted above. The Gentile believers were to pay the tax, as were the Jewish believers, even those who were not given the status of proselytes. Were to give the tax as full-fledged members of the covenant. Custom translates the Greek telos. That's a word we know very well. Telos, which usually means goal or end, but can also have a meaning of taxes, customs, dues, which is the meaning most English translators have often chosen. However, such a meaning seems redundant with the preceding phoron, which is the word for tax. Rather, the word telos here might have the sense of perfect, mature, or in the sense of full obligation or full compliance, like telos normally does. And maybe enjoining upon the readers the need to give full compliance to those who were making halachic rulings in the synagogue. Nenos has his own translation, the fulfilling of good results to those concerned with the results of your neighbor's behavior. Though this is awkward, the sense is there, act maturely towards those who make the rules, essentially. So that custom to whom custom is due is, with the word telos being there, very, very much has a lot more meaning behind it as far as like the full compliance. So essentially, and we get asked all the time, why do me and Brad observe Torah in a very, very orthodox manner? Because it was expected. You're supposed to blend in and be a member of the community. So this is very much an expected thing. And it's because of the refusal to do that it eventually breaks away and becomes its own religion, and eventually abandoning almost any and all of its original, Judaic roots in the process. Okay, did we get any questions while I was ranting?
We got a couple. So we got, what does patristic mean?
You can answer that, I'm sure.
Right. It's so what Seamus says every week, right? In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. So Patri, Father. It almost sounds redundant, almost to say patristic fathers, but it's basically the Church Fathers, right? Then we call them the Church Fathers because they are the earliest writings from Christianity, from early Christianity that we have post New Testament, right? So you have the New Testament, you have the writings in the New Testament, and then much later you have the writings of the Patristic Fathers or the Church Fathers.
And don't confuse them with the apostolic fathers.
Right. The apostolic fathers is the apostles.
It's the disciples of the apostles. They're the
Right.
apostolic fathers, and then the patristic fathers are the ones after them. Judaism does the same thing. It's a very common thing to do in the ancient world, is to name each generation something, and so you have like the Rishonim, right? Which is like Rashi, Ramban, and like that's a generation of scholars. You have the Geonim, which means geniuses that come before the Rishonim. The Arachanim, I think is how you say that.
Right.
So there's like generations of scholars get a sort of subdivision in which they belong, and
Yeah, it's almost like if like, like say maybe 2,000 years from now, men like D. Thomas Lancaster and Boaz Michaels and Tim Hegg might be known as the Messianic Fathers, right? Because they spearheaded the Messianic movement in a big way.
Yeah, and then I just had another one, but they weren't called rabbis. We said that in the beginning of the episode. They were called sages.
Yes.
So the time before rabbi was used as a title of authority officially, they were the sages. And so actually, funny enough, Yeshua is called rabbi very often, which is, again, a fairly common thing to do. But if Yeshua had not been deified and turned into the Christian God, he likely would have been considered one of the sages.
Yep.
But because he gets venerated in such a way that it leaves a bad taste in Judaism's mouth, eventually they don't give him that kind of title. But because he lived during the time of the sages, he would have been considered a sage.
Here's what happened. The opinions of the patristic fathers that they wrote about Jesus ultimately resulted in Jesus being left out of the Talmud in any kind of a positive light.
Yeah. All right. One here. Did Yeshua break Tanakh by eating with sinners? No. And we actually did. This is actually how we know that he was a Pharisee. This is one of the reasons, one of the many. But the fact that they bring this up, Pharisees in their day did not eat with sinners, essentially people who had a lowly job, like tax collectors. You were considered a sinner. Pharisees do not eat with tax collectors. That was like one of the rules to be a chaver of the Pharisee. Chaver mean friend in Hebrew, peer. And so they go and they're like, he's eating with sinners. Now, if he wasn't recognized as a Pharisee, they wouldn't have said anything, because that would have just been like, well, he's a normal person anyway. It's probably what he normally does. But they would, if they considered him a peer, then it would have been weird for him to go out of his way and eat with people that Pharisees don't eat with. And so the Pharisees walk up and they're like, that's a Pharisee eating with people we don't associate with them. What is he doing? And that's why it's recorded. That's why it stands out. That's why it's weird. And that's an indicator that Yeshua was considered a Pharisee.
Yep.
But no, it's not a violation of Tanakh to do that.
Now, since we were discussing Talmudic authority, we want to have hold on. Here's I think a good one. Off topic, but the early church Christians that Saul was persecuting, were they Jews, Gentiles, or both? They would have been Jews. Yeah, these for instance, we even know Stephen, right? Stephen was a Jew, which is why he was brought before the Sanhedrin.
Yeah, keep in mind, this originally started as a Jewish specific movement.
Right. It had not branched out to Gentiles by and large. There were some Gentiles, but not as many until Paul brought it to the diaspora.
And it probably naturally grew into the diaspora of Gentiles because there were already Gentile God-fearers in and amongst the synagogues. And so there would have been some Gentiles already coming to the faith and being included. But yeah, it's really by Paul going out and very specifically targeting non-Jewish affiliates as well. That's where a big kind of change happens too. But for the most, it's by and large in its early stages is a very particularly sect of Judaism with a minority of Gentiles about 30 years later, now we see an influx of Gentiles, and it's like a 50-50 split. And that's where we start to see tensions rise in the synagogues, because now the Gentiles are starting to outnumber the Jews, and that's beginning to be a problem. And it makes some Jews uncomfortable. So it was starting to create tension when that starts happening.
Right. So what I was going to say is, since we were discussing Talmudic authority, and it was brought up, the Sanhedrin 54b.
Oh, yeah, that question from earlier.
Right. So essentially, it's as I'm under. So yeah, he says, asking how people agree with it seems like the way it reads in English, especially if you're not really familiar with the topical matter at hand, that it is somehow accepting of homosexual pedophilia, right? Because it notes, right, if a child who is less than 9 years old engages in that activity passively. In other words, they were not an active contributor. The one who engages in it with him is not liable. This, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you're more familiar with it than me. This is not an issue of determining whether or not it's wrong or punishable. It's actually it's an attempt to explain how to classify it so that we know how to punish it. In other words, if it's not considered sexual intercourse,
correct,
then you can't punish it as a sexual crime, because it's not. Even though it came about in a sexual manner, it wasn't considered sexual intercourse, so it's not a sexual crime. This is just a crime of straight up abuse, and that's the point to making this distinction, is that they're essentially saying there is a particular age limit at which engaging in intercourse is straight up not intercourse. It is just abuse at this point.
And there's multiple reasons for this. So first of all, this is a legal document, and it's doing its best to define on legal terms exactly how to treat particular cases, legally speaking. So is it considered, one of the cases it like brings up, for example, is like, is a girl still considered a virgin? And this is a little sensitive, so warning to everybody else. If she's under a certain age and something happens, is she still considered a virgin? And the reason for that question is because if she wants to marry a priest, a Cohen, and then she has to be a virgin. Now, if she's under a certain age, does that count as losing if she gets sexually assaulted? So it's a very sensitive topic, and it uses very emotionless language, but it's legal speak. It is they have removed themselves emotionally from the situation to create very strict legal definitions of what constitutes as intercourse in any particular given scenario with age. And if it happens under that age, and many commentaries on this topic actually go into this in their introduction. They specifically say, this law gets brought up again, but it doesn't count as you were saying, like a sexual crime. It's domestic abuse, but we can't classify it as a sexual crime. So we punish it under the law as domestic abuse instead. Pedophilia is still outright wrong, 100% wrong in the Talmud, but a lot of people don't understand what's happening in particular sections, because you have to really know how to read a Talmud. You can't just read a Talmud. There really is an art form to it. And there's a lot of things happening all at once. And it usually doesn't warn you when a shift is happening too. It doesn't really warn you when like the Gemara and the Mishnah and the Baraita and everything is kind of like going back and forth on a particular issue. You have to kind of know it's happening. And this is one of those very sensitive topic issues in which they're just trying to create a very cut and clear definition of what constitutes as virginity in a particular case, so that moving forward, when they use that word, they know exactly what they mean by it. And there's no question. We're not talking, if God forbid, chas v'shalom, if somebody is sexually abused at a very young age, a father might be wondering, well, I had a prearranged marriage for my daughter to marry that Cohen, and she was just abused, which makes her not a virgin, so she can't marry that Cohen. We had an agreement, And this is where the law would say, no, that agreement is still good. She's still considered, at her age, she's still considered a virgin, so it's fine, right? So now we punish him on domestic abuse instead. It's ways of making sure that certain things still happen the way that they were agreed upon. Again, back then, most marriages were arranged, and that was just the way that things were done. Marriage was very much an economical decision, not a romantic one.
Yeah, the Talmud is not saying that the crook in this example is not guilty of any crime. What is being determined is what crime are they guilty of.
Yeah,
it's a foregone conclusion that they're guilty, but what is the crime?
Yeah.
Right. So how do we classify that, and how we classify it ultimately determines how we punish it.
And how do we classify the victim in this case too?
Right.
Because once again, the way you classify the victim has major impacts and implications on other laws. And so if you say she was sexually abused, well, then that impacts other laws that say if a woman was sexually abused, there's certain things that she can and cannot do. And so they had to make a decision. Well, we're not going to consider it this in this case because if we do, it ruins a bunch of other stuff for her later down the line. But if we say that it's not considered sexual abuse, even though it is, but if we say legally it's not, then her life goes on as normal. She's still a virgin. She still gets to marry a Cohen. All these other laws go completely unimpacted. So they're balancing decision making here to make sure that as little impact happens for the victim as possible. And sometimes they have to make a decision one way or another. That sounds really weird to us, but that's the way that Torah law is kind of.
It's funny that this is actually a really good introduction for what's going to be going on next week, which we probably need to discuss here.
Yeah.
So we will be talking about a subject that this topic would actually have been encompassed in next week. Yes, Ben. For those of you who don't know, the alternate kids fella, his name is Ben.
Ben.
we decided that last week. But next week's episode will not be on YouTube. Okay, next week's episode will be a Discord live function. So we will not have a YouTube live. It's going to be specifically on Discord, and the reason is there is no point for us to try and air this on YouTube. It's probably going to get taken down immediately.
Yeah.
It definitely demonetized. This is something that, because of the nature of the subject matter, will inherently end up violating certain guidelines. And the subject, the title of next week's is called Behind Closed Doors, right? So we will be discussing the topic of marital relations.
Yeah. So we are. So yeah, next week, if you're not already in the Discord, link is below. Join the Discord. It's open to anybody. This is not a Patreon exclusive event, but it is not going to be on YouTube. So if you haven't already, join the Discord. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. Bless the like. And I'm not going to say the whole thing right now. If you want to support the channel, we're about to go after this. We have an after Pardes, where you can kind of chill out with us in the Discord. It's exclusive to Patreon members only. The membership starts at $1 a month. And you get early access, and you get a lot of exclusive access to a lot of exclusive content that we have on the Patreon page. Brad just got done doing an excellent video review of a debate. It's fantastic, and it's a Patreon exclusive, so check that out. We got a bunch of stuff going on. So if you want to support the channel, link is right there on the Patreon. We really appreciate every single dollar, and we can't wait to get this website up and running. Those classes are going to be awesome. And so yeah, we're going to go into the after Pardes.
Yep. You can ask us more questions there, especially more questions about what could be deemed inappropriate topics, because it will be in a Discord chat, not on a YouTube video. So
yes. So, and you can just chill. You can just sit and talk about nothing, or whatever. It's whatever you guys want to do. We can sit in complete and awkward and utter silence if you want to. It's whatever you guys want to do. But especially you can one-on-one, you can ask us anything. If you have any biblical questions, any challenges, whether it has anything to do with tonight or anything, that's you get us. We sit there for about an hour, and it's whatever you guys want to talk about. So anyway,
maybe Faith will talk too.
Rebbiton.
She didn't say much tonight.
She's just there making that she's making the whole video look nicer with her presence.
Yeah, that's the goal.
All right. Well, it's been great. It's been fun, everyone. We love all of you. Seamus, again, our shout out to our patron supporters.
In fact, let's get it up here.
I'm gonna say you're the guy who does that, man.
I gotta get rid of this. Nope. Yeah, whatever. Why is it saying remove? There we go. I was like, why won't it come up? I was clicking on it and it wasn't doing anything.
Yep. And this may be going away after a little while. The Patreon, like we said, we're probably going to phase the Patreon over into the website, as you will be able to. Yeah. It'll take a while. But yeah, there will be, paid memberships and whatnot for the website with certain exclusive content. Certain courses will probably be exclusive courses, but there will certainly be some free ones. Yeah, super stoked about the website and the merch, as always. Matter of fact, I think the next T-shirt and hoodie I have to make is it's Pardes time.
That's right, Pardes time. It's Pardes time. So once again, I don't know if we put it in the bio, but patreon.com/alternate media. In fact, everything, Discord, Instagram, Facebook, you name it, YouTube /alternate media. Don't forget 2 A's, altar. But yeah, that's it. That's it for me. I think that's it for you, unless you got something else to add. I got just a little bit left for L'chaim. So
well, all right. Yeah, I will definitely catch all of you, hopefully, in the after Pardes. We love you guys. Thank you for tuning in tonight. And as always, L'chaim.